1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Nightmare on Elm Street came out of a series of articles in the LA Times, if I'm not mistaken, starting in, I would guess, in the late 70s. They were, as I remember, about 3 to 6 months apart, and they were not correlated. That is, the LA Times, for whatever reasons, did not sort of catch that they had had a story about this before. They were all very small, and essentially they would go like, some young man, usually of Southeast Asian origin, had been reported to have died in the middle of a nightmare. And the first two I clipped and kept without thinking too much about it, and then the third one had really the nub of a story in it. And basically this kid, and he had been he and his family had come out of the relocation camps in Southeast Asia, I think Cambodia, something like that. They were now in the United States, living someplace in California. And he had been troubled by severe nightmares. And they had they had increased in intensity to the point where he had told his family, they don't feel ordinary. And his family had tried to console him and tell him, we've come out of this terrible background. Nightmares are a normal part of your psyche, trying to deal with that. But he increased in the sense of trying to say, this doesn't feel normal, it feels too real. And at a certain point, they had a doctor prescribe sleeping medicine for him, and his father insisted he take it. And it turned out later that he had taken the pills in under their supervision, and then as soon as they were away, he had spit them out. And they also discovered later that he had a coffee pot in his closet that he had kept with black coffee to stay awake at night. So this had gone on. He had decided at a certain point to stay awake and not sleep. And obviously the family thought he was having something like a nervous breakdown. And after about 3 days, he would be downstairs watching television all through the night. They went down and found him asleep on the couch, and the father brought him back to his bed. And the family, sort of felt like, thank God, he seems to be sleeping peacefully. And they all went to bed. And later in the night, they heard screaming and thrashing about. They ran into his room. And before they could get to him, he fell dead, stone dead. And the family had had an autopsy done, and there was no heart failure. There was no sign of why he had died. That was a story. It was about a 10-inch story instead of the others were 3 or 4-inch stories. And I just read that. I said, this is like, it just evoked something very deep in me,
3, 4, better lock your door.
When I think about 7 years old, I was just about to fall asleep, and I heard this shuffling down the sidewalk and mumbling. And I went to the window. I was in a second-story apartment with, living with my family in Cleveland, and there was this man that looked pretty much like Freddie ended up looking. And I assume now he was probably a drunk, but at that time he was just this dark man. And he stopped, and he happened to look directly up into the window and right into my eyes. Now, I don't know how he knew to stop, how he knew a kid was watching, but somehow he did. And it just stopped my breath in my throat. And I backed away from the window with him just staring at me until he couldn't see me, and stood back there in the shadows and counted, And I don't know what I counted to, 100 or 200 or whatever, but I didn't hear him, and I thought he must have gone by now, but I would have heard him, but he couldn't just be standing there. And I went back, and he was there, and he just went, like this with this big leer. And then he sort of capped himself by starting to walk down the sidewalk, still looking over his shoulder at me, and then turned the corner and walked towards the entrance of our building, which was out of my sight. But so I remember running through the house, dark house, and going to the front door and putting my ear to it and hearing the door downstairs open, the door to the lobby of the building. Whereupon I woke up everybody in the house, everybody in the apartment. And my brother went down with a baseball bat. And by the time I had awakened everybody in the stir, this guy had disappeared. But that memory became the essence of Freddie. because that guy, whoever the hell he was, enjoyed scaring the shit out of a kid. And, that, extrapolating that and taking that to the nth degree, I think you have the kind of mentality of older men that can send young men off to war, or a generation that always hates the music of a young generation because it's threatening to them, because they are the ones inheriting new life, whereas the older people are the ones inheriting old age. So that became the essence of Freddy. And that man wore a hat like Freddy. So that's the origin of that hat.
5, 6, grab your crucifix.
Nightmare on Elm Street was written after I did Swamp Thing. I'd done 2 pictures back to back, and everybody was saying, you've made it, man. And you got to write your own script. Fantastic. Went off and wrote it, and absolutely nobody thought it was scary. Nobody thought it was good, except for Bob Shaye.
7, 8, gonna stay up late.
We were a very small company that was effectively distributing films to college campuses. And we had just decided to branch into theatrical distribution, actually with Reefer Madness, in fact. And I had a friend of mine who was an American guy who happened to be living in London, who was a producer named Mark Forstatter. And we were based in New York, and Los Angeles was really kind of forbidden, mystical territory. I didn't go out there very often at all. And Mark said, no, you guys, we're in the movie business, and I want to produce a film for you, so let's go and meet some of the hot young directors in Hollywood.
What happened at the beginning of the 80s, I guess starting with Halloween and Friday the 13th, is that there was a time when you could tell that kind of a story to a receptive audience. They could come for special effects that they hadn't seen before, that the film was being presented in a way that hadn't been seen before. Now, Friday the 13th, as it turns out, was the first film that was ever released nationally by anybody. Up until then, it had been The Ugly Stepchild. And films were things on big budgets that had stars and could be shown to anybody or any place. In 1980, Frank Mancuso, who was running distribution at Paramount, said, I want to take a shot on this one. He just got a big kick out of it, had a hunch, and basically he bet his whole career on whether or not Friday the 13th would work. It had never been done before. It went through the roof, and suddenly everybody said, whoa, let's start doing that. And they made more Friday the 13th. They made more Halloweens. Wes had for 3 or 4 years been nursing this notion of trying to do a horror film that involved dreams interacting with real life. I remember telling him, I said, Wes, I don't think anybody's ever going to buy into that. You think anybody's going to? And he said, absolutely, I know it can work. I said, geez, I don't know. He says, no, I know it can work. And as it turned out, Bob Shaye was the only one who really got it and really believed in it.
Bob Shaye, who I had met through, I forget, a mutual friend in New York. We had shaken hands, and he had said, I like your films. At that time, it was, I think, Last House and The Hills of Eyes that he had seen. I'd like to do something with you sometime. Do you have any ideas? And I described this idea. He said, I really like that.
So I asked Wes if he would send me the script, and he sort of mumbled, well, it was other people were looking at it, and he tried to get me a copy. But I was quite fascinated by it, and I continued to call Wes on a regular basis until he finally did send the script. And it was at that point that we began to make a deal to take an option on the script and on Wes's services so that we could develop it. And that was kind of that was literally the genesis of our involvement with the Nightmare on Elm Street.
He went off on something that took him 3 years to raise money for that. Meanwhile, I impatiently sent it to everybody in Hollywood, and everybody rejected it for various reasons. Either it wasn't scary. Sean Cunningham, who should know horror, said, I don't think people will be afraid of it because it happens in dreams, and they'll know it's a dream, so they won't be afraid. A lot of studios rejected it because horror was going through a period where it was considered politically non-correct, and it was considered dead, which is, I've observed this, having done this going on 25 years or more, that horror goes through these cycles where everybody says it's improper and it's dead and we'll never have it again, and then suddenly it comes back like gangbusters.
problem was that New Line not only didn't have any money, but we had a bank line of, I think, $100,000, but the bank line specifically prohibited us from using any of that money for film production. So I had to take this script and begin to try to raise money through pre-sales and trying to find equity partners to raise the $600,000, which eventually became, I think, $1.1 million, to finance the project.
And I collected a huge stack of rejection letters saying thank you very much, but we don't think it's for us, or we don't think it's scary. And then finally, Bob Shaye was able to put together about half of the budget that I thought I needed. And I decided, well, it's either now or never, so we went ahead and did it.
9, 10, never sleep again.
I wanted somebody for Nancy that was, first of all, very non-Hollywood. I wanted somebody that I felt like really could live next door, not like the beautiful blonde sort of bimbette, but somebody like was your babysitter, or somebody you would trust and was non-glam and had a real head on her shoulders and had courage in her face somehow. And Heather had that. She had that sort of genuine through and through feel and a sense of sort of personal courage about her that I really liked a lot. And I just thought she had that sort of brunette quality, of something real. And I don't think she was terribly difficult to find. I mean, once she came in, I sort of recognized her.
The beginning of these films for me was, I believe it was my second audition for the film. I went to a casting office in Hollywood, and it was very crowded. It seemed like 12 or 15, young women, and we were each going in one by one, and I got to go in with Amanda Wyss, and we went in together, and I read for Wes, and I remember during the reading, I was just compelled to make my fingers into this shape and say, it was just a part in the dialogue where I'm describing my dream, and I just had this little claw that just became alive somehow, and I think Wes really liked that, and he let everybody go except for me, and he came out and he said, "I'd like you to know that I'd like you to be Nancy," and that never happens in Hollywood. They always have your agent call your people, and it's never like that, and that's the kind of man Wes was. He's so. I just felt like he and I started out on a very strong footing because he was so open and warm, and for an actress to be told at the audition that you're going to work, I mean, it was a great day. I went right to the gas station and went to full service, which is what I always do when I get a part. I always feel like, I'm going to make it.
The more difficult thing was Freddie, and by the time I had made enough films that I knew that quite often a scary film will absolutely depend on the casting of the villain. And if you don't have somebody who can really personally scare and is willing to scare and able to go into those places in himself to find that sort of element, you're doomed. The film will not work. And Freddie was originally written to be an older man, too. I was looking originally at men in their 60s and 70s, frankly, and could not find anybody that had the wherewithal to come up with that kind of energy.
I had just actually broken up with a girl that I'd been with for a long time, and I was out in the clubs on Saturday nights because it was my one night off, and there was a great musical renaissance going on in Los Angeles then, and the club scene was really fun and not too hyped and really inexpensive. And I can remember going to a couple of the goth bars in those days, the early sort of gloom and doom bars, and seeing clips of Wes's old movies, The Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left. So Wes had, in terms of actors and artists and the club scene and all that, Wes had kind of a great underground reputation back then.
Robert sort of came in on a fluke, and first thing I thought is he's much too young, and he doesn't look at all like I imagine Freddie, which was wrinkled and kind of evil-looking Robert. It's kind of, cheerful and high energy and everything else. But he had a fantastic energy and willingness to play it and an enthusiasm for it. And ultimately, that's what won me over. Because I had found that where actors fail playing evil is that certain people simply are unwilling to admit that that's in them. It's my theory that it's in all of us. And you can tap into it, and it doesn't mean that that is what you are, but you simply acknowledge that part of you. And for an actor, he has to be able to relish, being really, really nasty. And Robert was able to go there.
I always felt when we were filming the first movie that it's rare in modern films, and certainly the films that I've seen in my life, where the protagonist and the antagonist are so clearly defined and actually represent good and evil with no equivocation at all. And Robert Englund and I talked a lot about the underlying, symbolism of our battle. And Robert is a very intelligent person and very highly trained actor. So he, in a lot of ways, encouraged me to think of the battle on much more, archetypal level, if I can use that word. And he and I even today talk about it as if we're talking about a Greek tragedy. We've never thought of it literally as popular teenager slasher film. We always have had the respect for it that Wes was able to create a modern myth about, the struggle between good and evil. And as the issues of Nancy became more developed, first you just see her as a teenager, then you see her as the child of a divorced family, and then you see her as a person who's very concerned about her friends. And then in the later films, she's trying to take care of teenagers and a social worker type, and then finally she's a mother of her own child and a wife. She, and we often, Wes is very, I think, concerned that her story was always toward the good and what our ideals and virtues are all about in our society. And we always talked about those things. And Robert and I, we enjoyed being enemies, and we were always, playing those kind of tricks and stuff on each other as that.
And there is some kind of Cocteau Beauty and the Beast thing between Heather and I. And I don't know what it is, but there is a dance between Heather and I that has sort of become archetypical. And the audiences respond to that on a subliminal level. There's something about us, they don't want to see us get it on, but they'd like to see us butt heads. And I think they'd like to see Freddie force a kiss on her. They'd like to see her as a heroine in jeopardy, as a direct result of Freddie. It's almost as if Heather somehow, because of her beauty, and she has a sort of a subliminal American beauty that I think works as a heroine. And I think that the corruption of Heather by the evil of Freddie there's a chemistry there that audiences really responded to. Nancy, Freddie, I call it Heather because it's Heather that is Heather's own charisma as a personality, that and a look, actually the way Heather looks, and it's a plausible beauty that I think makes the Nightmare on Elm Street movies not just a horror film and not just a great cultural parenthetical from the 80s into the 90s, not just a Beauty and the Beast thing, but it also makes it, in the most popcorn terms, a date movie.
I wanted Freddie to be able to shape change, because I was aware in mythology that was an important thing, and I thought at times he should be able to get out of the symbology of his own body into something greater. So I wanted him to have something instantly recognizable. So it was gave him a sweater with stripes, and made them that sort of shade of green and red that I had found in a book of colors that were great, that are hard on the eye. So that is one of the hardest combinations of colors for the eye to process, those two shades. So that was that. And then it was like, all right, so what weapons does he have? What weapon does he have? And, by that time, there had been a lot of films with a lot of specialized weapons and chainsaws and butcher knives and everything else. And I said, okay, you're looking for something that is ancient, something that stands for something that's been around as long as you can imagine. What has been around? Well, obviously the draw, if you will, of all these weapons is that they are edged weapons, which is the simplest and most ancient weapon there is, because nature is full of edged weapons, saber-toothed tigers and incisors and claws and talons and everything else and horns. And so I said, okay, let's take a combination of the human hand, which is the epitome of mankind, the dexterity of the human hand, and combine that with the claw that I'm sure the most primeval man was cowering from around the corner in some cave with a cave bear or a tiger or something trying to reach him, and put those two things together. So that was the combination of that. And that kind of makes up Freddy, I think. That was the basis. And then putting him basically in the labyrinth, in the Hades, in the hell of a boiler room, was just to put him in that kind of mysterious, dark place that's underneath what society gives to kids at his school.
Probably the reason they've never replaced me is probably because of the walk and the body language of the character, which is all me. And I brought it, and there's a lot of reasons for it, and Wes certainly encouraged it and liked it. But the makeup design, for instance, is really, a lot of that goes to Bob Shaye and to Wes Craven and to Dave Miller sitting around. I can remember going in and being part of those sessions and listening, and things were discarded and things were retained and some things didn't work. I know Bob Shaye had always wanted Freddy to look more melted, and he really wanted flanges of melted flesh and stuff, which is actually, scientifically correct to the way burn victims do look for a while. But it does look great when you move and it becomes backlit. But it also, when you move, it can also become silly a little bit. It looks a little dangly, and it's like an actor who moves and his hair and after he stops moving, his hair keeps shaking. It kind of looks a little silly sometimes.
So then it became a factor of how do we make him look old, and how do we... And so we sort of, I think, it just really emphasized the scarring as a much more outlandish element of his. And it added to the mask-like quality of it, too, which I thought was good.
Jim Doyle, the special effects guy, brought me in on the first Nightmare on Elm Street and had me meet with Wes Craven. And Wes took me to lunch. Very nice guy, more like a college professor than a director. And he just basically, discussed the film and his concepts for Freddy, and just basically explained he's a burned-up figure. He should be really scary looking, and you should see a lot of muscle under his skin, with open sores and holes, and really disgusting to look at. And he said he was going to light it very dark, so everything should be like overly done, so you can really see it well. And one night I was eating pizza in a pizza parlor and was just kind of playing with the cheese with my fork. It was a pepperoni pizza. So I was kind of rearranging the cheese around the pepperoni, and I thought, this looks good. So instead of eating it, I just took it home and and used that as a guideline for creating Freddy's face.
The hat that Freddy wears was originally described by Wes in the very first script. But Wes, trying to cast, the Johnny Depp role and the Heather Langenkamp role and the parents, and looking at all the potential effects and the limits of the budget on the first one, and dealing with all of these things, Wes at one point lost his confidence in the snap brim hat, which he had described to me in our very first meeting, and which was in the script. And I remember one day showing up in this little closet of a dressing room with this terrible couch with cigarette burns all over it, and Wes and Bob Shaye sitting there on this sort of funny 70s Bette Midler love seat, you know, that had been left over from how many countless movies, dressing rooms. And the two of them sitting there on the broken springs of this thing, kind of sunk in because they're both big guys. And me changing hats, and it was like a Laurel and Hardy routine, you know, or an old vaudeville routine. And I had to put me paperboy hats on, and caps, and all these different hats, and they were all ludicrous. And I remember I had fought for the original snap brim hat and wanted it distressed and soiled and frayed. And it was Wes's original vision, but he had kind of lost confidence because he had so many other decisions to make, and he was being, I don't know whether it was wardrobe that led him astray or what, but I remember like knowing, you know, Wes, you got to stick with this is right. This original vision of yours that you described to me on the first interview, and it's in the script. This is right. This is really, he needs this. And I think I said something like, well, we can hide an eye under it. You know, we can always hide one eye, and that'll be good. We can get the light underneath, or we can catch the light in this eye. And we can, you know, there's a lot of makeup and effect, and we'll hide, and we can reveal the bald head, then we'll have that reveal potential. And after a while, after several of the Nightmare movies, I really liked playing him bald, because that was such a great, this is before we had every goddamn villain in low-budget horror movies or in action movies. Now we always have to have an obligatory bald guy with one earring now. But way before that, way before you had one guy with a contact lens with a head shade, which is all, as far as I'm concerned, an echo of Freddy, even up to the heights of quality of Martin Scorsese and his remake with Mr. De Niro, you know, of Cape Fear. I see echoes of Freddy in that climax, and I see this influence a lot. And, you know, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, even if it's subconsciously. But this was the first time you had a bald, melted villain, you know, that could reveal that. And so that whole design element in the hat and the body language, I take kind of credit for at least maintaining the hat.
There was a nose, an upper lip piece, separate cheek pieces, a forehead piece, and then the back of the head piece. I don't know, I've lost count now. But there was a separate ear because it was supposed to look like his ear was burned off. So his real ear was under the appliance, and the fake ear was on top. So there was like a lot of holes in it. So when it was backlit, you could see light through it. And they were all just pre-painted. So when I got on set, it'd be easy to just blend them together with makeup around the seams. So the whole process it started out taking about 3.5 hours to put on, which is a long time to sit in the morning. He would fall asleep sometimes, and I just wake him up when I was done.
Being under all that makeup, I was sort of liberated, and I was able to really perform with quotes again, because I had just hit that point as a film actor where you really start getting into that indulgent behavioral work. And, you know, the more you watch that film acting, you can see a lot of stuff that we call real is just this sort of behavioral soap opera acting. You see people taking all this time now in film acting, especially in talking head television, where everybody takes their moment, as they say on Ally McBeal. And that's not how people are in real life. People talk a mile a minute. They're on their cell phones. They're overlapping. They're interrupting each other like Italians do. They're doing those parentheticals. And what Freddy did for me was I was able to physicalize, move differently than Robert Englund could. I was able to pose, you know, kind of like, you know, music videos has embraced that kind of posing kind of thing again. I was able to make myself look bigger than I am. I was able to make myself look tougher than I am. I was able to play myself older than I was when I began Freddy, certainly. I changed my voice for the role. And every once in a while, I was able to use that clown element, as you suggested, the cruel clown, kind of mixing that kind of vaudeville energy with a kind of sadistic, you know, undercurrent, which was really fun to do.
Well, the thing I remember most about Nightmare 1 was how precarious it was financially, because New Line didn't have a lot of money at that time. We had been around for a while, but we were always hand to mouth, and We didn't have a great deal of money, and we'd put so much into developing this project and getting it where it was. And everything seemed to be rolling fine. And 2 weeks before we started to shoot, something happened with, I think it was our video deal. We lost a deal that had been one of the major pieces of the money, fell apart. So Bob said, Sarah said, I want you to go to LA and sit with the crew and the cast and tell them the situation and tell them we need them to trust us and hang in there, and we'll get a new deal together, and they'll all be paid. But I was 6 months pregnant at this time, and I went to California, and I called these 100 people together, and I said, the bad news is, we just don't have any money to pay you this week. But the good news is we're going to be able to. We know that we will. You just have to trust me. And all these people looked at this 6-month pregnant woman, and they all told me they had to believe me. They just, and I looked like I was going to cry at one point. I said, we can't lose any one of you. You all are a really wonderful crew. And if, just trust us and work this week, and we'll get you your money hopefully by next week. As it was, 2 weeks went by, and we couldn't pay anyone. And we didn't lose one crew member. We never lost anyone on the shoot. They stayed with us.
By the time, I suppose it was 1984, Nightmare on Elm Street came in. I remember the movie almost didn't get made. It was a last-minute problem of some sort, and somebody came in and put in some funds. But I remember the very first day when I met Wes Craven. It was a scene at a cemetery. And I told him quite honestly that I really liked the story idea. That is to say, my own intense interest in psychology latched onto the possibilities and the implications of dream stuff, giving dreams as sort of equal reality, the story seemed to be suggesting. That dreams were the stuff of which real whatever emotions were made of, violence, troubles, and stuff like that.
I introduced myself to John Saxon the first day of shooting, which was in the cemetery scene when one of the characters is being buried, obviously. And John Saxon, who I just said, hi, I'm Bob Shaye, and he says, I don't know what I'm doing on this movie. He said, I don't know who these people are, and do you know anything about them? So I said, yeah, I think they're really good people, and then I walked away. And then I really kind of overstepped my producerial duties with Wes, who had some experience making movies, certainly more than I had, when he was doing a fourth or fifth take of some scene, and I said, well, I think that's enough, let's move on, because I was scared to death that we were not going to be able to make this movie with the financing that we had, and we had a completion guarantor that was looking over our shoulder the whole time, and it was just, the whole thing was and I had a responsibility to the home video company that in case one day's dailies were behind, or any of what, they could take over the whole film, take away our equity interest, take away our distribution fees, and take away our distribution activities, and just totally take over the film. So he had all of these ogres sitting on my shoulder. So I told Wes, I said, I think that's enough, let's move on. And Wes turned around to me and he said, wait a second. He said, if you think you're going to rush me through this movie, you're out of your mind. Now go sit over there and be quiet. So I said, okay.
We had a good time. I remember having a very good time. It was a great crew. We had a lot of fun. At that time, I had decided, I had read an article by Truffaut saying that the thing that strikes respect to people's minds more than anything else is wearing a tie, glasses, and a hearing aid. So I had experimented with wearing glasses and a tie, and I sort of settled on wearing a tie and a checkered shirt every day for the hell of it. So after a while, the crew started showing up and doing. They would do specialty days, and one day everybody showed up wearing a checkered shirt and a tie. Jacques Haken, who was shooting the picture, would wear an eye patch over the eye that wasn't looking through the viewfinder. And he had this theory that allowed you to look normally and not have any distractions. So one day he turned around and we were all wearing eye patches, which completely infuriated Jacques. But One day they had a Nancy Day, and everybody came to work in nightgowns and pajamas, and I remember the gaffer wearing slippers with bunnies on them, you know. So we had a lot of fun that way.
I always imagined that the kiss between me and Johnny Depp would be really romantic and well, something that I might remember for the rest of my life. And I frankly don't really remember it that well because Wes kept cutting it down in its scope because he wanted me to be preoccupied with my, you know, problems and the tension of the night. He didn't think that I'd just give myself over to passion. And so I think, too, Johnny and I were both new actors on the scene, and we hadn't probably ever had kisses on screen. And, I mean, no offense to Johnny, but I probably looked really stupid. And so I feel like perhaps it was just kept very brief and modest because, you know, just for the sake of the audience. Things weren't quite so racy back then either. I don't think people like to see teenagers totally making out.
It was difficult. We shot it in 32 days. I think our schedule was originally 30 days, so it was like a very tight shoot. At one time, actually, Sean came in and shot the second unit for me. And I think the last several days we were shooting with, if I'm not mistaken, something like 5 units shooting at the same time on the same stage, and I was going from one to the other, you know, setting up shots and shooting and then going over to the next setup when it was ready. I know Freddie building his glove and Nancy sinking down into the steps, the mother being sucked through the front door, and I think Rod's sheet coming around him in the prison cell were all being shot simultaneously, along with a main speaking scene.
I was looking to try to get some money for the company, and we thought, well, maybe we should do is not distribute this movie, but maybe we should just sell it to an international distributor and to a domestic distributor. And our lawyer at that time was a guy named Michael Lynn, who I'd gone to law school with, who subsequently is now president of New Line, but at that time he was our outside lawyer, and he was also Sean Cunningham's lawyer, and he had sold Friday the 13th to Paramount. So he called me up and he said, listen, I think that you got a good movie here, but, you know, I bet you I could get you $2 million or $3 million for it from Paramount. And the film cost $1.1 million. I was looking at a $900,000 profit, even though we had to share a lot of it with a great deal of it with our investors. It would at least get us out and get us to move on to something else. So we set up a screening for the film for Frank Mancuso, and who was then head of Paramount, and their whole marketing department. It was on a Saturday morning. And we had been trying all kinds of different endings to the movie, and tried one and then the other and a third, and finally we came up with one ending that seemed to work the best. So they wouldn't let me sit in the screening room, but I was with the editor in the projection booth while we're showing the film to these Paramount executives. And they would let the editors, by the way, sit in the screening room just because he was doing the mixing, because we couldn't afford to get a mix, even though it was double system, which means the sound and the picture were separate. But they wouldn't let me sit in the room, but I'm standing in the projection booth watching them, and suddenly I see the editor stand up and walk out of the room and come into the projection booth. I said, what's wrong? What's going on? He said, I just remembered we don't have the right ending on the end of the movie. And the ending we have is one that we really tested the worst of all of the endings. So I said, oh my God, what are we going to do? He said, well, the ending's across the street in the editing room. And I said, well, you know, we've got 17 minutes. It's the last reel is on the thing. Hurry! So he runs and he runs across the street, comes back in, and it's on the rewind, and we're racing to get it the last reel out, to cut the other thing off, and the film is running through the projector, and it's about ready to run out. All these guys are sitting there. I got a phone call from the head of acquisitions about an hour or two later. Said, we're not going to take the picture. And I said, why? And he said, because if you remember this movie that we just released with Joe Rubin about people and their dreams and getting into their dreams, it was a little bit like Brainstorm, actually. He said, and that didn't work for us, and we don't think movies about dreams are going to work. So I said, are you sure there's nothing we can do? And he said, no, there really isn't. I'm sorry, I wish you luck with it, but that's it. So this is one of the great turndowns of all time. Every time I see Frank Mancuso, I tell him, you saved me many, many millions of dollars by by peeing on my leg, and I don't mind for a second. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the turndown.
But I swear to God, it wasn't until I saw Nightmare all put together that I realized what Wes had always known, is how strong it could be and what a good, fun movie it could be. But it was really up to just the two of them, or the only two that I knew, that really got it from the get-go.
Actually, we knew we had a hit when we had a screening in Baltimore, and John Waters called us afterwards, and he had just gone to see it because John goes, actually no, it was the opening day, and John Waters went to the 10 a.m. show on opening day in Baltimore. And he called us up and said, you've got a hit. And John knows, John sees all of these movies, and he knows what works and what doesn't, because he has a real sense of authenticity. And he felt this was real and the kids would relate to it. And so John gave us one of our first reviews, and he was right.
Rachel's box office computer. Nightmare 1 cost about $1.8 million and made, I believe, about $18 million, but it may have made closer to 20. Nightmare 2 cost about $2.2 million and made, I believe, about $22 million. Nightmare 3 cost about $4.5 million and made something around $40 million. Nightmare 4 cost somewhere under $7 million and made just under 50. Nightmare 5 cost, I believe, and this is the one that I wasn't involved in, so cost about $8 million and made, I think, only 25. And then Nightmare 6 cost, I think, 8.5 and made 35. And I have no idea about Nightmare 7.
Rachel's, I think, one of the people that really knew it was going to go somewhere. And I think Bob's, had different theories over the years. Robert Shaye from New Line, I think, he's been proud of it and a little embarrassed and everything, and it's sort of like, his bastard cousin, this Freddy Krueger thing that he's created, And I think Sarah kind of always looked at it as one of a group of things, but Sarah always was sort of like the den mother, because I can remember like when the craft services got better, it usually meant that Sarah was around and things like that. But they're really the people that witnessed every moment of it, the entire genesis. Wes was off doing wonderful projects like Serpent and the Rainbow and creating other things for years, and then he'd come back. But, Wes was, gone for a while and came back, and then gone for a while and then came back. But, those are the people that were really always there.
Bob saw early on the sequel possibilities of it, and he wanted at the end to have something where Freddy was. The script had Nancy coming out on her front porch with her mother at the beginning of the new day, and it was foggy, and her friend showed up in a school bus, and Nancy got in the bus and drove away into the fog, and he didn't quite know whether it was all a dream or what. Bob wanted Freddy to be driving the bus. And my feeling was that completely refuted sort of the victory of Nancy, that she had beat Freddy, and she had faced the demon. And, to make that some sort of a hook for a sequel, first of all, would be kind of demeaning to the film, and I think kind of subvert what the character had achieved. And we did argue about that, and we argued vehemently about it. I don't think we ever screamed on the set. I'm not a screamer. I don't think Bob... Well, he's not a screamer with me. We've never had a screaming fight. And we did sort of strike a compromise where we devised a shot of a car that had the stripes of Freddy on its convertible roof, and the kids showed up in a car instead of a school bus, and when they all got in, the top came down, and they drove away sort of under the power of the car, and the mother was sucked into the door. It was always something that I hated afterwards. At the same time, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and that I owed Bob, because, it was so clear-cut to me that he was the only person that I could find in the world that had the vision and the wherewithal to raise the money for that.
God. It's bright.
gonna burn off sooner. It wouldn't be so bright.
Feeling better?
Oh, I feel like $1,000,000. They say you've bottomed out when you can't remember the night before. No, baby, I'm gonna stop drinking. I just don't feel like it anymore. Did I keep you awake last night? You look a little bit peaked.
No. I guess I just slept heavy.
Okay. Well, see ya.
See ya.
Do you believe this fog?
Oh, I believe anything is possible.
You're looking good, girl.
Bye! Bye, Mom.
One, two, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door. 5, 6, grab your crucifix. 7, 8, gonna stay up late. 9, 10, never sleep again.